Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you all for joining us. Let me welcome you all on behalf of my director, Mr. Sianeho, who is not here with us today because of other engagements. This training is part of our series workshops on research and publishing. This is our first workshop, and be on the lookout for more training for more workshops on research and publishing. And for today's training, we have engaged a renowned publisher, Elsevier, to conduct the training on our behalf. And without wasting time, I'm going to invite Danishri to introduce the trainer for today. I believe at the end of this training, we'll have time to ask questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Kumo. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to today's session. My name is Daneshri Mudvi. I am the consultant for Elsevier, and I work with the product Scopus Science Direct and Mendeley for customers of Elsevier that are based in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm really pleased and delighted to be able to host the session for you today at the request of your university. And I think I'll just spend a few minutes just to introduce our company to you. So Elsevier is a global leader in information and analytics. Elsevier helps researchers and healthcare professionals advance science and improve health outcomes for the benefit of society. We were traditionally known and trusted for publishing for over 140 years, but Elsevier has now transformed into an information and analytics business. Now, you may know the products that Elsevier hosts, which is Science Direct, Scopus, and Mendeley, and you have access to all three products at your university, where Science Direct is your database that provides you with full text journal articles and book content, Scopus being the world's largest abstract and citation database of peer-reviewed literature, is used more as an information discovery and analytics tool. And we have hosted training sessions for both of these products. But if you require more training, we are more than happy to accommodate that. And we also have recorded training sessions, which we can share with you. So if you're interested in that, do put your email address into the chat box, and I will share these resources with you. But for now, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, who was kind enough to accommodate us at the very last minute for this session. Khalid Shalan is a consultant for Elsevier Core Research Solutions in Africa. He is responsible for capacity building and supporting researchers using Science Direct, Scopus, and Mendeley. He stems from a background in academia. Khalid has worked on multiple roles in the British University in Egypt and Nile University as a teaching assistant, research engineer, and technology transfer officer. He has graduated with honors from Cairo University, mechanical design, from the Mechanical Design Engineering program, where he also received his master's in 2015. He then joined Northwestern University in Illinois, United States, on a Fulbright grant, working on research funded by the US Department of Energy and in collaboration with industry, which was Ford Motors and DOW Chemical. Khalid is also the co-founding chair of the Egypt section of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. So it is my great pleasure to hand you over to my colleague, who will be the presenter of today's author workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Danishri, if I might say. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm pleased to actually be part of the session today. So I'm gonna start, and at any point, if you do have any quick comments or so forth, please just at any point feel free to ask questions via the Q&A button that you can see on the bottom of your screen. Also, if there is any issue with audio or video or any problem that you're not able to follow up with, please leave a comment as well on chat. Please do confirm if you are able to see my screen.
Not yet, Khaled.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of computer hiccups today. My apologies. It should be visible now. Please confirm.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so today I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the building blocks or setting the structure for your research article. We're gonna shed some light on relevant topics as well, such as plagiarism and selecting journals for publishing. Today, let me ask you a question, and please, if you can answer via chat. Let me know if you have published a paper before on one of the Scopus Index journals, for example. So just to get a sense of your background when it comes to publishing. And also, if you are preparing your first article as we speak, also do let us know, please, on chat. Any input, anyone? Yes, we're starting to see. So some people have mentioned that they're preparing their first article or haven't started to prepare yet. No, for now. It is okay. And let me tell you that you shouldn't worry much about how that would work. We are going to actually be talking more about this. Oh, some people have already published. That's good to hear. Okay, so these are good points to have. Also, do we have graduate students here with us today as well? People who have started writing their dissertations or theses? Anyone? Mhm. Oh, that's perfect. So we have a lot of people who are writing their dissertations as we speak. So I'm gonna touch point here today, since this is important. I'm gonna touch point today as well on how do you convert your thesis dissertation, some like tips about how you convert your thesis dissertation into and a research paper as well. But we have to work our steps step by step here. And let me ask you here a question. So why do researchers publish in the first place? Why bother with publishing um, in the first place? So before you get like a general gist of how you get your research published, you have to know that there are a few things you need to meet. One thing is to have a good topic, and that goes without saying, but there are some details that go into this. But let me tell you that the first thing you need to know about publishing is that the journal is looking only to publish papers that can be considered interesting for the journal readership. If your paper will not be of interest to readership, the journal will not publish it, no matter how good the science you have it is very important to understand that journals work under journalistic standards, similar to the newspaper, for example. If what you have to say is of no interest to anyone, then most likely it will not get published there. So that's one point to pay a lot of good attention to. Other thing that is very important is that you have to maintain that the data and the information you're building your research on is coming from trusted sources, is coming from high impact journals, for example, is coming from peer reviewed literature. If your sources are trustworthy, that gives more credibility to your research. However, if your research comes from shady sources, if one might say, then that will compromise the credibility of your own research. So it's very important to look at the basis there. Other important point that you have to understand that writing a paper is a technical process in its own right. So it is about how you communicate your research. You could be doing spectacular research. However, if you are mispresenting your research, if your writing is not clear enough or is confusing for readers, people will miss the point of the great value that you have put into your thesis. So very important part of why you should write a good manuscript is that this is your ambassador. This will carry the value of the science you have done to the readers everywhere. Okay, other important point is that when you choose a venue or a journal to publish your research, you have to be very careful that you are publishing your work in a credible place. If the venue that you have chosen to publish your research is a trustworthy journal, then people tend to treat your research as such because they know that trustworthy journals have very strict peer review process in place. Your research is validated very, very carefully before it can be set or before it can be shared with other researchers. Very important point as well, you have to understand that it does not end with getting your research published. It's very important to promote your research once it has been published. Part of that is that you have to consider promoting your paper after it has been published. And you can do so by so many ways. So nowadays we live in the era of social media. And within social media, you can leverage within the academic circles, for example, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or similar. Other point is participation in scientific conferences. So scientific conferences is very important for having discussions about your paper. Those kinds of discussions are actually new ideas could be coming up out of your research, of the discussion with other researchers in the field, and it could also be very useful to come up with new ideas or new collaboration for your next paper. Okay, with that being said, let's have a look at what goes on to getting your research published. So this is a little bit of a diagram for those of you who are familiar with flowcharts. It should be easy, or those who have a background in business planning or process planning, that should be very easy to understand. But for the majority of us whose backgrounds did not include training about this, let's go step by step here. So you're the author. This is your starting point. You have done your research. You have good results to share. These good results, you need to get them published. And let me ask you a question here. And if you can share your viewpoint, because this can be a little bit variable. Why do you think that researchers want to publish, or what's the need to actually get your research published? Does any one of you have any ideas to share about this? On why researchers publish? Why is there such a thing called publish or perish? Why is it a big deal? Why is just seeking to get your research published, why is it that important? Ideas?
Hi everyone, just remember you can communicate with the speaker in the chat box or use the Q&A box to type your answers in.
To add to the knowledge base, that sounds like an interesting point. More ideas?
One has come through in Q&A, advance your career.
To advance your career. So basically, a lot of universities would put a key performance indicator on your performance that you have to get research published. If you are not getting enough research published, then probably you need to reconsider your productivity and your efforts to get your research published. So definitely that lies. To share new information to readers, that's a very interesting point. It's a bit similar to adding to the knowledge base. So let me tell you this. Part of the mandate of being an academic, academics are responsible for creation and dissemination of knowledge. So one thing that is very different between industrial R&D and academic research is that academics have a mandate to share knowledge. Academics do not withhold knowledge. And the thing is, as mentioned, if we imagine a whole sphere of what knowledge is, every tiny research, every single paper is a little bit pushing for few millimeters that boundary of our knowledge. But because there are hundreds of thousands of papers coming each year, that pushes the entire frontier of science. Everybody adds a little piece of the puzzle. So the thing is, if you are an academic and you're not publishing, that would mean one of two things. It's either that you're withholding knowledge, which goes against the whole ethos and mandate of academics, or that means that you're not productive or you're not fulfilling your role. That's why universities would put pressure on you to actually get your research published. This kind of pressure varies by institution. Some institutions will tell you you'll not graduate until you publish peer-reviewed research. Some other universities tell you that you'll not get tenure or you'll not get promoted as a faculty member unless you get published. Other institutions would look at things differently. Some look at it because it's a very important part of the assessment of the institution by ranking agencies, for example, and so forth. So that's why we need to go through that cycle to start with, because by the end of the day, this is, as some of you've mentioned, this is what advances your career as well. So as an academic, you start at this point here. So you've done your work, you've written up your results in a paper, and we're gonna see how that goes. You find a journal that's suitable for the topic you want to discuss. That journal would, so you submit a paper, you find a journal and you submit it. Here, if you can see the paper, or at this point, it's called a manuscript, because nobody else have done any effort other than the authors in writing that manuscript. At this point, it's called a preprint. And I'm gonna write it down on chat here. So what is a preprint? A preprint is the manuscript before anybody else has laid hand on it other than the authors. So the editor receives the manuscript here at the preprint, and the editor would ask themselves, is this paper interesting to my readership or not? Does it follow the requirements or what we call the aims and scope of the journal or not? And let me give you a very crude example. Let me say that I'm a mechanical engineer, for example, and let me say that I wrote a paper on whatever topic in mechanical engineering, but I submitted it to a journal in biology. The journal in biology would tell me that this is not relevant to what we publish. We are a journal that publishes biology journals. You cannot publish an article about mechanical engineering. It's not relevant. So why is this a very crude example? Because this can even occur within the same topic. So let's say, for example, that I wrote a paper and I submitted it to a specific journal in mechanical engineering, but what I submitted, the paper, for example, I submitted to a material science journal, and only 20% of my paper are related to material science, but the majority of the paper is discussing something else, for example, or is discussing energy, for example. They would tell me that your article seems more convenient to be published in a journal that pertains to energy than material science, for example. So this is what the editor would do at the first point. If the editor believes that the journal is not is not a suitable place to publish your manuscript, they would desk reject the paper that or the manuscript that you have submitted. Some journals, for example, have certain qualitative metrics for getting the research published. So some journals will tell you that we want to publish papers only that change, that causes a huge paradigm shift in science, or papers that are truly groundbreaking, that transform completely the way we look at the topic. So if your paper is interesting, carrying some good results that people can build on, but it's not radically groundbreaking. So that journal will tell you, no, your paper does not meet my goals of publishing only groundbreaking research. You should consider other journals to publish in. So if your paper does not meet the requirements or the aims and scope of a journal, your paper would be desk rejected. If your paper meet the basic requirements, it would go through the peer review process. Let me tell you, from an editor perspective, peer review is one of the very difficult tasks for an editor. Peer reviewers are volunteers. So you get a manuscript, you want to put it through peer review, you have to find experts in the field, experts in all the topics that you have in your paper. They have to be multiple, at least 2, and usually people go with 3 reviewers. And you would have to reach out to these reviewers, send them the abstract of the manuscript, tell them, I have a paper, this is the title, this is the abstract, would you please volunteer time to review this paper? If the reviewer accepts, then we send them the manuscript that you've sent. Now the reviewer will go meticulously over everything that you've mentioned in your paper. They would write up a report and they would give a recommendation to the editor. So what happens now is that the editor gets a report telling him, with reporting everything, all the comments that they would have, whatever they want to challenge in your paper, and the reviewer will give the editor one of 4 recommendations. These recommendations are so usually these recommendations are to accept as is. Sorry. Accept, let me just go easy a little bit on the font. Accept as is. And let me tell you that this almost never happens. Any reviewer would have a comment. The comments could be technical, like saying that, no, you've done this experiment, you should have done it other way, or you should have increased your data set or whatever. And the comments as well from the reviewer could be related to how you communicate your results. So they could tell you that this part of the paper, this sentence is a little bit dubious, or it has two meanings, or it's confusing for the reader. So they could comment on your writing, or on the technical aspect of your work, of your research work as well. So let me tell you that accept as is almost never happens. Second one is to accept with minor modifications, which is the greatest news you will probably get, or the greatest recommendation you will get from a reviewer. They have to tell you in the report what these are. Third one is accept with major modifications, or they could advise the editor to just reject your paper. Now, the editor receives a report of what the modifications requested are, what's the general comments. All these comments will be shared with the reader. There is also few comments that the reviewer can share without, like just with the editor, tell them that they have comments for the editor without being shared to the author. Remember one thing, that the peer review process has to at least be single blind. This means that the reviewer should not be known to the author. So as an author, I know that there is reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3, and I don't know who their names are, but I know they're experts in the field. So with the multiple reviewers, the editor now receives these reports and the recommendation from each reviewer. In a lot of cases, the recommendations could be conflicting. One reviewer tells you that you should reject the paper. One other reviewer tells the editor that it should be accepted with only minor modifications. Who takes the decision and compiles these reports together? That's the editor. So now the editor would finalize the decision. And when it comes to finalizing the decision, he would either accept as is, which almost never happens as well, to have unanimously all reviewers believing that the manuscript should be accepted as is. That never happens. Or they could tell the author that your manuscript could be accepted, but you need to do few modifications. They could tell that you need major modifications. And when the editor, when it comes to rejection, there are few options that the editor can do during the final decision, the editor decision, sorry. They could reject and tell you that, yes, the reviewers see that there are tons of modifications your paper needs. These modifications will take too much time, and I'm not going to wait for you to do modifications that will take 6 or 8 months, for example. So I'm going to reject it for now, and I'm going to ask you that when you finish this modification, please resubmit your paper. So for now, the process will halt. We will exit because it has been rejected, but you know that you can one day resubmit the manuscript. Other times they could transfer, and this is something that we have been growing at doing at Elsevier, for example. If I believe that this is a good paper, but it should not be published in my journal, it should be published in another journal. In a lot of cases, the editor would suggest a transfer to another journal at the same publisher. If that is the case, the editor will also send the reviewer reports to this other editor to save you time to go through, to save you time with the peer review. But then again, that second editor at the second journal will receive the same review reports and will take a new decision based on these reviewer reports. Sometimes that second editor might call in for an additional reviewer as well, and they would take the decision on that other side there. So you know that your paper could be rejected with one of these possibilities, and you know, just to know that there is a good chance that your paper will be rejected outright without possibility of resubmission or transfer or similar. If your paper gets rejected just outright, then you will need to work on your manuscript. You can make use of the comments you received from the reviewers to actually make your manuscript better when you submit it to another journal. If you have been asked to do revisions, then you will have to revise the paper and try to work to reply to the editors, to the reviewers' comments, and try to make use of these comments and make your manuscript better. If you think some of the comments do not make sense, then you can reply to these comments, but usually what you will have as a revised manuscript. So that's another important term for us to know. After a preprint, after the first round of revision, you have a revised manuscript. What would happen? The editor will receive the revised. We will go in a cycle now. The editor receives the manuscript to see that you have actually complied with some or all of the reviewer comments. He will send the manuscript again to reviewers, ideally the same reviewers. The reviewers, he would ask them, are you satisfied now with the revisions? And they could say, yes, we can now accept the manuscript as is, or no, we still need more modifications, whether minor or major. And based on that, the editor will either return the paper again to the author to do these more modifications required. So now you have a second revised manuscript. You go through the cycle until the authors, until the reviewers accept your paper as is. Sometimes it happens that after the first review, your paper could be rejected. It depends on how the reviewers see your paper, but you go through that cycle ideally with modifications until your paper is accepted as is. And finally, your paper can now proceed to the publishing process of typesetting, metadata enhancement, and so forth, other things that the journal does to make your paper discoverable and ready for discoverable online, available in good format online, and as well as available in print as well. So at this point, do you have any questions about the peer review process? If you do, please ask your questions on the Q&A button. I'm going to give you a minute to let that sink in and to ask me any questions you do have about peer review process. Any questions? If you don't have any questions, please tell me on chat that you don't have questions, that everything is clear. If you have questions, put them on the Q&A. Other than that, I'm going to assume that I've bored you, that everybody is sleeping by now. Are you asleep? Can you still follow? Perfect. Yes, thank you. Thank you for being interactive. That's good. It's good to be hearing from you. Okay, so let's proceed with how you start to prepare your manuscript. So before you start preparing your manuscript, you have to ask yourself a question. Am I ready to get published or not? So if you are ready to get published, you know that your work would advance the field, that there is an added value to your paper. If you have an added value to your paper, that means that you have original results, something new results to share, or new method, a new research method to share, that it actually enhances what we already know in published work. And also your paper must have an up-to-date review of a subject or field. You have to demonstrate that you are already following up. that you are already following up on these on the most up-to-date advances in your field, that you are not reinventing the wheel, and that actually the work is what we already know in published work is missing something. That this paper is adding to the current body of knowledge. If your work is outdated or has been done before, or you're doing an experiment or a study, but you're coming to incorrect conclusion, then your work would be of no scientific interest. And remember that editors have the best interest of the reader in mind. The reader comes first for an editor. So a few questions that you need to ask. Have you done something new in your experiment? Is there anything challenging in your work? Is the work related directly to a current topic of high interest? Have you provided solutions to some difficult problem or new results to share with everyone? Your answer should be yes to at least some of these questions. If you can answer yes to all of these questions, then you are probably gonna come up with a very strong manuscript. And now you are ready to start communicating your idea while writing a paper. So how does a manuscript look like? You have to understand that there are two breeds of manuscripts, two main breeds. There are more kinds as well, but these are the most important two. One is called a research paper or an original article or similar. This is when you are communicating a study that you have done and communicating the results of this study. So that's original study that you have done. What it would consist of: a header section, the title of your paper, the abstract, and the author keywords. The main body of your manuscript would consist of an introduction, methods, how we've done the experiment, what are the results, what does the result means in the discussion, and coming to a conclusion. The last part are the acknowledgement, references, and supporting materials, which remains optional. So this is called an original article or a research paper. So what's the other kind? It's called a review paper. So in a review paper, it's usually written by somebody who's very well versed in the field, somebody who has a long track record of publications on the topic. In the majority of cases, the editor commissions a well-known author in the field to write a review paper. So usually it is commissioned, but even though the editor has asked an author to write a review paper, it would still, when the editor receives the review paper back, it would still have to go through peer review. So the fact that it was commissioned does not mean that the editor will bypass peer review. A review paper has to be reviewed by experts as well. So in a review paper, why would you write a review paper? You want to summarize the state of the art of the topic. And in a lot of cases, you have to have an added value. It's just not a repetition or summary of other people's work. You have to be giving the readers some new perspective when they read what other people have done. So you're not communicating a new study or new results that you've done, but you're rather collecting what other people have done, putting it into a context. So in a lot of review papers, we have seen that sometimes the author of a review paper would tell you, okay, I've gone through the literature and I found out that several people tried to solve this problem with several approaches. I'm gonna combine these approaches into 3 main types. So that's a new information for us, or a new organization for the already published work. So they could tell you that there are people who tried a certain type of methods for their experiment. Other people tried a second type, and third people tried a third family of solutions, for example. Sometimes you can comment as a reviewer on other people's work. You can say that this family of papers, or this type, since you've established a type, for example, that this type would actually shows more promising results than the other technology or the other method other researchers worked on. So it's very flexible. You would have the same header and introduction, but when it comes to this red part, or the core of your paper, it would be very flexible to arrange it into whatever headlines or whatever organization that you see better fit to explain the state of the art and to comment on it for readers. Also, you would have conclusion, acknowledgement, references, and optionally supporting materials. So what does this section means? Let me tell you that in both of these papers, the core message that you have for readers is actually in the parts in red here. You've written this entire research paper to tell people about your study. How did you do the studies? What are the results and what do they mean? So that's the main message you have from an original paper. If it's a review paper, then the main message is whatever summarizing and reviewing you would have for the literature, as flexible as you organize it. All the parts in black are there to support your core message. So everything else, the title, the abstract, the keywords, the conclusion, the acknowledgement, the references, all of that is there to support the parts that you see in red.
Khalid, you are mute.
Oh, apologies. My apologies for this. Can you hear me now, Danishri?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you. Sorry about that.
Perfect. So you can work on your title, abstract, keywords, introduction and conclusion while you are working on your results, but you would need to update them later. So let's start with the first here, with the title. So the title is built to attract readers' attention. When you are writing your paper, remember how you were a reader and how you used to check or search for articles. So usually when you, as a reader, when you're doing your own literature review, you search for articles, either if you are using an indexation service with advanced features like Scopus, for example, or even if you're using a search engine, you have search results. And the first thing that you look at is the paper's title. So that's the first thing that attracts reader attention. A title should be concise, it should contain fewest possible words, and it should adequately describe the content. Remember that no click baits allowed in science. So you can't have like a very flashy and big attractive title that when I read it, it's very interesting, but when I read your paper, it does not correlate to the article. This is not nice to do if you are doing social media, and definitely a complete no if you are writing science. And so your title should identify the main issue. When it comes to titles, there are few different structures when it comes to writing titles. Some people used to write something like a compound noun. So what is a compound noun? Like the effect of factor X on process Y. So that's a compound noun. So there is no verb. Recently, especially in biology, one of the new trends is to write a complete sentence. So what is, how would that look like? Apologies, still my computer is a bit freezing. So let's see some examples to some of the titles here. Yeah, it's responsive again. So some of the titles are what's called compound noun or an incomplete sentence. So like the effect of something on something else. Sometimes people, which is a new trend in biology, especially started in biology, it's what's called a complete sentence. So like, for example, smoking increases expression of ACE2, increasing and chance and possibility of COVID-19 infection, for example. So this is a complete sentence because it has a verb. So it's usually a title that is a statement coming from your conclusion. Other thing that is also very interesting is having a question. So like, for example, saying sudden cardiac arrest, who is at risk? So that's actually, it has two clauses, and the second clause here is a question. Another example for two clauses is something like this. So so for example, electric vehicle battery technologies comprehensive review, for example. So that's usually a title for a review paper, but it can be used in an original paper. So something like, so I'm just coming up with examples, and I'm trying to put them from different fields. COVID-19 cash crunch, for example, if you're in finance, and for example, causes and remedies, for example, and along the same title. But remember that what you need is to maintain your integrity by identifying the main issue in your title and trying to come up with something that would be of interest for readers, for example. Actually, some of the examples here are very close to actual titles, and some are just examples I've drawn up myself. So these are different examples for titles. So moving forward, the next section now is the abstract. And let me tell you, it's one of the most critical parts when it comes to writing your paper. The abstract is a short summary for every part of your paper. So usually, if you publish a subscription model paper, so the full text would require a subscription or a purchase by the author, the always free parts of your abstract of your paper are the title and abstract. They would be free for anyone to read. And so what is an abstract? It has to summarize the problem, and this comes from the introduction section. Tell us briefly in a sentence or so, how did you do the experiment? What is the most important result that you came up with, and what does it mean? So it's a single paragraph. Usually an abstract is something around 500 words. So remember that in a lot of journals, it's usually in the range of 250 words. Sometimes they can go up to 500 words. Some journals can go more than that, but that's usually not very common. Usually in conferences, it can be a bit longer in conference papers, but usually these are the lines of words that you would expect. So usually, like, if you are writing a very short abstract, there should be a sentence summarizing the problem or a problem statement coming from your, and why is it an important problem? This comes from your introduction. what kind of method did you do to the experiment? We did numerical analysis. We did a survey for or interviews for users. We did an experiment. We did an analytic model or whatever kind of method that you've worked on with a statistical analysis, for example. And the result came up with that 90% of the interview that usually people of the certain demographic has the following preferences if you're doing research or marketing, or that there is a possibility of infection higher within children than adults, or whatever main important results and conclusion you have. So you have a sentence for that and a sentence for that. You have to make your abstract interesting and understandable. This is the first thing that people will read after your title. And if you're doing search on a search engine or an indexation tool, usually people check the title, read the abstract, and decide if the paper is interesting to commit to read it or not. You want your abstract to be good enough to have, so if you attracted the reader's attention in the title, the abstract is your opportunity to make sure that the reader will commit to reading your paper. Make it accurate and specific. A clear abstract will strongly influence whether or not your work is considered. And remember when I told you about peer review, if you ask an editor, what is the most challenging part of your work? The most challenging part of your work would be, for an editor, is to find reviewers that will commit their time and volunteer their time to review a paper. The first thing the reviewer sees before committing to review would be the title and abstract. So the abstract is important, not only to get the reader's commitment after it's published, but also to get the reviewer's commitment to review your paper. When people usually complain about the time needed for their paper to get published, one of the main important bottlenecks is that editor reaches out to reviewers to review the paper. And remember that if you're able to raise the interest and influence the decision of the reviewer to review your paper, so when they accept the invitation to review, they will be sent the full text. And part of that is the abstract. So take all the time you need to write your abstract carefully. Many authors write the abstract last so that it accurately reflects the content of your paper. Any questions so far? I saw a question that was asked earlier about the general criteria for preparing a manuscript, and I believe that this is what we are answering throughout this entire session. Because the abstract is very important, remember again that you summarize the problem, the purpose, and the motivation of your work should be there from the abstract. The approach or methodology is there from the methods section. The results should be, the most important results should be in your abstract, as well as the conclusion and what value also coming mixed between the conclusion and introduction. What is the value of your paper? What does it add to science? So again, these are some of the points we already discussed. So remember that the reviewers only see title and abstract of an article before committing to review. Title and abstract are the only three parts of an article available to everyone. While reading the abstract, the reader will decide to commit to reading the rest of the article and if the article is of interest. And it makes all the difference between your article being read or not. The more researchers who are interested and who would read your paper, the more researchers who want to read your paper, the more chance that they would find it useful and cite your paper in their future papers as well. So there is a question on chat, and I believe try to remember to put the questions on Q&A so as not to have any questions being lost. So a review paper is only by commission. usually by commission. Okay, that is the most case. But in other cases, and we've seen this happen a lot, you would write to an editor suggesting that you want to write a review paper on something, and the reviewer or give them like an abstract for the review paper you have in mind. And that abstract would actually, the reviewer, sorry, the editor would tell you, yes, this sounds like a very interesting review paper. Please write it for us. After you write it, submit it, it would still go through peer review. So it could be accepted or rejected, even if you are commissioned. And another question is, how many publications should one have to write a review paper? I would say that you should be well versed in the field. However, and remember that when you write papers, usually you're not alone. So you could be writing a review paper alongside your advisor, for example, who's very well versed in the field, or other more experienced researchers. So you could be writing it together. But remember, the most important thing is that your review paper is comprehensive and it adds insight or perspective. So you learn not just that it summarizes other papers, but there is some perspective or added value that you are adding to the reader out of reviewing those other papers. If you believe that you're able to do that, then you probably can get your review paper published. I hope this answers the question for our that has been asked. If you need any follow-up, please do ask me, or you feel that the answer needs more clarification, do let me know. There are no like strict rules on like you have to have published 4 papers to get a review paper accepted. No, there is no such thing. But I'm telling you that usually reviewers would be looking to somebody who's well versed in the field, and to see that the paper would actually be adding perspective or adding some sort of added value to the readers. Review papers not only by commission, but you will find this in the journal's guide for authors. The guide for author, sometimes it would tell you that we accept submissions that are review papers, so you can submit them just like original papers. Other journals will tell you that review papers are only commissioned, or if you will tell you that if you have an idea for a review paper, communicate with the editor or similar. So you can do that as well. Somebody's asking me to share my presentation. Danishri and I, we will be coordinating that you receive these presentations. Next part of the paper are the keywords. We live in an era where it's actually very easy to explain keywords are. These are the hashtags of your paper. Okay, these are the phrases that you would have to, when you're writing keywords, similar to using hashtags on social media, you're trying to predict what people would be searching for, what search terms people would be looking, like writing up on their search engine or Scopus or similar. What keywords would people use in their search if they want to read my paper? So you're trying to hack into the mind of your readers. These keywords are used by search engines and indexing and abstracting services. Remember that the keyword is a key phrase. It doesn't have to be a single word. So like, for example, I could have a keyword. So I could have a keyword that says, for example, lamb waves, for example. So that's one keyword, for example, from one field. And another keyword is acoustics, for example. So it could be broad or it could be specific. Let's try something else. Photovoltaic, if you are talking about energy, and solar energy, for example, and another one is multi-junction photo voltaic cell, for example. So if you've written already photovoltaic here, I would remove this first one, for example. So you try to look up what people would be looking like. Let's try an example from marketing. So segmentation, consumer behavior. Let's say FMCG, for example, fast movable consumer goods. Here comes a little bit of an interesting part. Do not use abbreviations unless they are very well established. So for example, everybody knows what DNA means. Few people know actually what it stands for, like what's the complete phrase for DNA, but people are more likely to be looking up DNA than looking up nucleic acids, for example. So if I'm to write FMCG, I would probably write fast movable consumer goods, for example. If I'm looking, for example, here, somebody's mentioning example data mining. That's a very interesting. So one of the things that are very interesting to do here is that when you are writing your keywords, you want to like put up the key phrases people are more common to look up, to search up. So data mining, it's a very exciting topic. Big data, very exciting as well. Data, machine learning, also very, very exciting topic as well. I'll give you another example. So let's say I'm writing a paper, like usually remember that keywords are limited. Usually you have like something around 5 keywords. You cannot write a lot of keywords. It's not like an Instagram post where you like write 20 different hashtags. No, for keywords, the author is permitted to put around 5 keywords. Some people will some journals will tell you only 4, some journals tell you 6. Usually the average is 5. So remember one thing, if I was to use one of these two in 2022, which one would I use? Air pollution or global warming? Which keyword should I use? And please let me know on chat. Who would choose air pollution and like something about a factory or a process, a manufacturing process that emits sulfur dioxide to air, for example, or carbon dioxide, or so let it be carbon dioxide better than sulfur oxides. It emits a lot of carbon dioxide. Which keyword would you use to your paper? Somebody's mentioning global warming. Other is, yeah, we have 2 for global warming, 1 for air pollution. Global warming is still ahead. So I'm omitting carbon dioxide because if somebody here is from chemistry, it would look a little bit different. But I'm talking here about emissions of carbon dioxides into air, or carbon capture, or whatever similar thing, or methane. So the thing is, air pollution used to be a very trending topic, like title that everybody's talking about in the 2000s or the 1990s. Nowadays, although it's the same topic, emitting carbon dioxide or methane into air, but nowadays the term global warming is more likely to be actually used, and it's more likely for people to use global warming nowadays. So it's useful to know what are the current trends that people are talking about. So here it would, if you actually, and this is an analysis, if you have access to Scopus or Scival, for example, there is a way to analyze how often a keyword is being used. But if you do that kind of analysis, you'll find that in 2022, and even maybe since 2010 or even earlier, global warming is a more used keyword, a more looked up keyword than air pollution. Although it's the same science, it's the same research, it's the same everything, but people are more likely to look up the word global warming. I hope that was clear. And remember, if you do have any questions, please do ask them on the Q&A. Some of the questions I'll be answering at once, and some other I'll be leaving till the end to look up. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the next part of our paper. So remember that we have the title, abstract, and keywords. Next comes the introduction part. So the introduction part is giving context to readers and bringing them up to speed. You can be writing the same topic, but if you are submitting to journal A, you will write a different introduction to journal B. What does this mean? So each journal defines its readers in the aims and scope. So imagine a paper that you have done some research on an irrigation method for some specific crop. Okay, so that so your paper, if you publish it in a journal that is about agriculture, for example, or focuses on crop sciences, your readers will be, because you are discussing application of irrigation or water technologies and resources, and you have a specific crop or a type of crops that you are discussing. So the people who study crop sciences would be very familiar with crops, but would need you to familiarize them with irrigation techniques. Alternatively, if you're going to publish this paper in an irrigation journal, then you need to give your readers some more context on this specific crop or types of crops that you will apply your technology to. So here you need to give readers a brief context on the topic. And another thing is that even if you are writing a paper on crop sciences and you're going to publish it in a journal about crop sciences in general, if you are writing your paper on a specific kind of legumes, for example, or beans, then your reader could be specialized in crop science, but not that specific crop. So you still need to give some context there. But if you are going to submit your journal in a highly specialized journal, let's say that there is a journal of legumes, or okay, and then you don't need to go very basic about defining the needs of legumes or beans, because most probably the reader will not need to go through much details because they already know about this. Okay, so that's an example from agriculture. For example, you can use this example to any other example. Let's say business administration, okay, and you are doing research on marketing. If you are submitting to a business administration journal, you have to give some context about the marketing. You're doing research on segmentation, for example. If you are submitting to a marketing journal, people will more likely be familiar with segmentation, but not the specific technique. If you are publishing in a journal that's called marketing segmentation, which is a more specialized journal, then you don't need to go through the basics much. It will bore your reader, it will make them bored. So you have to adjust the amount of context and the depth of context to your readers as the readers are defined by the journal. You have to address the problem. You have to state what kind of problem you're working on. Okay, why is it an important problem? Why is this an important topic? You have to address that. You have to identify what people have already done. Have they tackled this problem? Have they started to identify other papers? Have they identified solutions, for example? Have they suggested those solutions, discussed their limitations? You have to say what other people have done and what's the missing part that your paper is trying to fulfill. Okay, so what's the gap? What's the knowledge gap that you're trying to fulfill with your work? So this is where literature review comes in. There is no section in a paper called literature review, unlike your dissertation, but you have to do that literature review part in context of differentiating your paper, telling what other people have done, what's the limitation or how you are continuing other people's work, and to establish the value of your paper. And you identify what your work is trying to achieve. By the end of the paper, you have set out a motivation, a goal that you're trying to achieve with your paper. It is okay if your paper has achieved this goal completely, or by the end of the study, you could have only partially achieved the goal. You could have, like, you set out to an objective, you've only like done 60% of that objective, or sometimes altogether. We've seen some papers that set out to optimize a specific process using a specific technique, and by the end, it will tell you that we have proved that this technique is not suitable. That's an added knowledge. You're just notifying other people, this is a dead end. Don't go through the dead end, go through other methods or techniques, for example. So sometimes that's actually useful, even if you fail to achieve the goal that you've set out on. Important part about the introduction, the very last statement, a sentence in an introduction, is describing the layout of the manuscript. This is similar to what you do in your dissertation as well. At the end of the introduction chapter of your thesis, the end of the introduction, whether in a thesis or a paper, original paper or a review paper, you have to let your readers know what are the different sections in your paper and how your paper would progress for your readers. Is it clear at this point? Any questions? I don't see any new questions coming in. Are you still here? Can you let me know in chat if you're still following up?
Kelly, did you see the question about 50% of the viewers accept your paper? How is that handled?
Yeah, I will come again to this question, maybe a little bit after going through the sections, not to interrupt the flow, because this is related to the peer review process, which we have finished, but I'm gonna address that question once we've completed the structure of a paper.
Thank you. Everyone is commenting to say your presentation is very clear.
Okay, that's good to
Thanks.
hear. Okay, so remember one thing. You could have done this experiment or this study for many, many years throughout your PhD or after you've obtained your PhD, and you've written multiple articles with every study that you've done in the same field. Remember that you cannot reuse introduction. You have to write a new, unique and fresh introduction for every article, even if your article is a continuation to a previous article. You will need to rewrite a unique introduction, a unique new introduction to recapture your audience, to accommodate the journal. Ever since your previous paper, new papers have been published, you need to reposition your paper within the literature as well. There is a question, do you define key terms in this section? Actually, the keywords have their own section. So remember here that there is a section for keywords. And one technique is that you can embed those keywords, like the keywords that you've used here, you can reuse, like you can embed those same keywords smartly within the abstract and the title, because this makes the search engine, if I find a search engine or Scopus or whatever, if I find the same keyword repeated, used here, it was used also in the abstract, it was used also in the title, then it increases the possibility of your paper coming up first on the search results. Do this smart, not to force a keyword into context. You have to bring it easy for the reader as well. So we're introduction. Now we go through the core part of your work. First thing is the methods. You describe how the problem was studied, okay? You have to be very detailed. Part of open science or transparent science is that people who read your paper are able to replicate it, your paper. If your paper and your results cannot be replicated, then your paper will be deemed not trustworthy. This is a very important concept. This is a very important word. If your work cannot be replicated, then it will not be trusted. Okay, very important. So in order for your work to be able to be successfully interpreted, you have to describe in good details how your work was done, what are the criteria, what are the parameters, what are the settings, you have to be very clear about how your method and how it was done. Some even, like I've seen an extreme case in some very famous journals in biology, cell-pressed journals in biology, they would tell you that the methods section, you write it in your paper, but you have to put it as an appendix with as much pages as you need in order to make your results replicable. So I've seen papers with 5 or 6 pages describing very specifically to extreme details what the methods were. If your method is something that was previously published, so you're using this researcher process that is very well known and was described to details in a previously published paper, then you can only cite that I've used this method, and you cite the paper that came up with the method, and you specify what kind of parameters or conditions you used with that method. Also important to identify the equipment and the materials used in your paper. Remember that the novel part or the new part about your paper could be the method that you have devised. You have invented a new method for preparing a specific compound, for example. Or you've created a new methodology for or a new metric for assessing something, assessing results, or whether it's social science or physical science or whatever. So sometimes the method part could be your novelty part in a paper. And if it's the novelty is not in the method, but you've used new parameters or new materials or whatever, you still have to specify very clearly the method that you have used in order for your results to be replicable. Next section is the results. So you could have tons and tons of results on your data sets, for example. You include the results of or the data with primary importance. Try to organize your results, use subheadings to keep your results of the same type together. You have to be clear, easy to understand. Every sentence should have just one meaning. You do not want to write sentences that have multiple meanings. You need to highlight the main findings, like make them very clear. And a lot of people, when it comes to reading papers, the title would catch their eyes, they would read the abstracts, and then they would skim through your paper and check the results section before reading the paper. Sometimes this happens. So you have to highlight, make it very easy to recognize the very important findings and results when people are skim reading your paper. And if you have unexpected findings, feature them. Important part about outliers. So what are outliers? So let's say I'm gonna put in an example here for what outliers are. So let's say that I have a result that I plotted on a graph. So something like this and this. The points I have look like this. And there is one result here. So if you're trying to plot your results, it would look something like this, for example. So this is the trend that you've established for your results. This is what you want the results to look like because this is your model, for example, but then there is this point here that does not obey anything. So about how to handle outliers when it comes to your section, there are like different things that you can do here. One thing I would advise you, if you're a graduate student, discuss it with your advisor how you are going to present the outliers. ideally, what we want to know is that you should not just, you have to be very transparent with your readers. So in case that you can say that this is a result that we have obtained, but as we investigated, we find out that it did not follow the model because the settings were not right, or there was a power cut in the lab, or whatever. But some other cases, if you are collecting data through a transformer, in a lot of cases we use filters to remove the noise from something that we are measuring. If you are using filters, you have to be very clear that I've used the filter at the following parameters to filter some of the results. So whether you are going to you have to, if you have filtered results, or if you are how you're going to handle outliers, you have to be very clear and transparent. It would be up to the reviewer to accept what you have said or to challenge it. And even if your reviewers approve what you've done, you have to be very clear to the readers to decide. What could not make sense to you, we've seen a lot of cases where this point here, while it did not make sense to you, for somebody else who has read the paper, they would say, I've done the experiment and I've also seen that outlier. And a third one would say, yes, I've also recorded that outlier. So somebody could look into, and we could find that this outlier happens because there is a special case or a boundary condition or something that we should have included in the model. So it could be a gateway to a new discovery. So as a general rule, this is part of the skills or expertise that you build as you go to research. How do you communicate your outliers? But remember that the golden rule here is that you have to be very transparent with your readers, okay? Other thing is that whenever possible, please provide statistical analysis. It makes your results more reliable and more credible for everyone to read. And remember that when it comes to results, a picture is worth 1,000 words. A graph is very important, very important to read. Of course, remember one thing: if you're writing a graph, you have to name your axes, name your units or scale. There should be a legend and so forth. So try to include illustrations that would make it easier for readers to understand your results. Also, it would be very important for the skim, for people who are skimming your article, trying to decide whether or not to read it. Okay, next is the discussion section. So the discussion could be within the same section as the results. So this is where you try to interpret and tell us what those results mean. So sometimes the results and discussion could be the same section where you mention the result and you then describe it or interpret it, next result and interpret it, and so forth. Or they could be a separate section. So you mention all the results together and you measure, and then you have a next section where you are discussing and interpreting the results. Most important is that you have to make the discussion, if it's a separate section, it has to be parallel corresponding to the results. So the first results would be discussed first in the interpretation, or at least they have to be linked together so that this section would be very strongly related to your results section. This is, I would say that if you're writing a paper, if you're writing a paper, it's very important because this is the section that actually, this discussion section is actually the section that tells your readers what to expect and what is the meaning and what is the true value of the results that you have came up with in your section. Last point here is to compare. Whenever convenient, try to compare your own results with other results that people have come up with, especially if they convey a very strong message, or at least show us how your analysis compared to other people's work, or your experiment or study compared to other people's work.
Hi, everyone. Just sorry to interrupt the speaker. Um, so I know that the session is meant to end at 4:30, but the speaker has a bit more of the presentation to get through. Unfortunately, there was a miscommunication on the time. So his presentation is meant to end at 5. So if you cannot, accommodate the little bit of extra time, it's fine. I will share the recording with you. But if you're willing to stay on, then please do. So sorry about the inconvenience, but I definitely will share the recording. Thanks. I'll hand back over to you, Khaled.
Danishri, Danishri, we don't have to ask them to stay the entire 30 minutes. I believe that going over time, over the scheduled time, because for maybe 10 minutes, like ending
10.
at 16:40, I believe that
Okay.
would be sufficient to reach a good point on the topic here.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Khaled. Okay.
So 16:40 should be good.
Okay, cool. You can proceed. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So this is the discussion section. Be careful when you're writing your discussion. Do not go beyond what the results can support. If you've shown that for a specific case, your process gives better results, don't go and say that this is the best process that could ever be conceived. Okay? If you cannot prove it, just stick to what the results can support. Do not use non-specific expressions. Nobody really likes to write a paper that just says that this proves to be a nicer result. What does nicer mean? You cannot say non-specific expression. Even if you're saying something is better, how do you quantify that, or how do you support that? Okay. Tell us, is it faster, is it cheaper, is it how cheaper is it? It's cheaper by 10%. So there is something specific. Try to be as specific as possible, and do not introduce new terms in the discussion that you haven't mentioned before. If you have invented a new analysis technique, it should be in your introduction that you tell us that through this paper we will coin a new expression or a new term. So do not use a term for the first time in your discussion. It should be there somewhere earlier. And please do not use speculation on possible interpretation that are based on your imagination. Try to be very, very specific, okay? Suggesting possible interpretation or possible results, or things people should investigate more, should not be in your discussion. That should be later on in the conclusion and future work. You can say that there are two possible causes. This should be investigated further by someone else. That should go in the conclusion, not the discussion. So the conclusion, this is where you have to be very clear. You provide justification for the work. You tell us how your work advances the present state of knowledge. You suggest future experiments or future work that yourself or other people should do. And you try to bring it all together. You comment on you've set out on the introduction, you've told us the objective and motivation. In the conclusion, you tell us that we were partially successful, or this method does not work, or we have fulfilled the objective that we have set out to on the introduction. You tell us where did we get at the end of the paper that you have written. So that's the conclusion section. Yeah. Apologies. So, so far, I still like to remind you that if you have any questions, again, as a reminder, please put them in the Q&A. Okay, so Next section is the references section. So remember, when you're writing references, do not use too many references. Just stick to the references that are relevant to your work, or the ones that are relevant, the ones you built your work on, or the ones that you have, sometimes the ones that you're criticizing. Or remember that the references, the majority of references come from the introduction section, where you're writing every other people's work and where your work fit in within the grand scheme of things. So if the paper is relevant, cite it. If it's not, don't. But to err, or like, it's better to oversight than to undercite. Okay, both are not optimal, but when in doubt, cite. Okay, but just don't go overboard with things that doesn't make any sense to be cited. The style for referencing is, if you're writing your dissertation, it should be assigned by your institution. If you're writing for a journal, the journal will tell you what kind of style for referencing that is used. Use credible sources. Do not use Wikipedia, for example, when you're writing a paper. Do not use, because it's crowdsourced, anybody can edit on Wikipedia. Okay, I personally love Wikipedia, but it's not a scientific reference. When you're writing do not use predatory journals that have no scientific credibility, or fraudulent journals. Do not use them as references, and so forth. Remember that references are not just written by the link. When we mention style, this is how a reference would look like in the reference section. Like any style would have who wrote, the author, what was the name of the article, where was it published, where exactly, which year was it published, where can we find it online, or if it's available online. If it's only in print, you should mention the name of the publisher, and the ISBN if possible. And usually people have relied more on a unified linking system called the DOI. So usually DOI links. So for example, if they would look like something like this, doi.org, and then there is some code, something like, for example, XMY, whatever. So it would look like something like this. So that's a unified linking system, and it would it's used, doi.org is used by all publishers nowadays, and so forth. Also, within the text itself, you use something like in-text citation, like use a number within your writing or the name of the author to tell which reference in the reference list matches this specific part. We have sessions on using this referencing and using Mendeley for this that we can go through maybe in a later stage or another session for this. If you're writing a review paper, remember that the main important part about the review paper, the core part, is how you're introducing the ideas that you're summarizing or reviewing from other articles. So try to divide it into subheadings to reflect the organization of the topic. Try to make it coherent. In all cases, it's strongly advisable to, whether it's a review paper or even an original paper, to have an outline. So like you have your headings, your subheadings, it's good to have, like, when you're building an outline, subheadings and subheadings. Go as many levels as you can. Remember that each paragraph while you're writing should cover just one idea. A paragraph is written by this. So it is first sentence should express the single idea in a paragraph. The next sentences should provide support. Remember that the sentences should provide evidence, context, explanation. So you go with as much sentences as you would need. And the last sentence in a paragraph should link this paragraph to the idea in the next paragraph. Okay, so this is how a paragraph would look like. First sentence is the idea. Next are support or explanation. The last sentence links the idea that we've described in this here in this paragraph to the idea that would come in the next paragraph, which should be on the first sentence of the next paragraph. Okay, and try when you're writing a review paper, the real value is how you link the studies, whether it's like by grouping or by comparisons or whatever, how you establish a link between all the articles that you are reviewing in a review paper. Okay, so supplementary materials. So these are addenda or things that you add after the paper has been finished. So these look like raw data, for example, or process data, software or source code, tables, figures, videos, audio, any material which supports the methods or findings of the article and may help in the reproducibility or the applicability of the findings that you have. Okay. Some journals would tell you that it's better to have data sets to add with your article. So it's a must for some journals. Some journals will tell you it would just be better. And some journals will not comment about data and will leave it up to you. However, papers that have supplementary materials are way more likely to be cited than papers which do not, because these papers can be more trusted. Okay. The more you're transparent about your science, the more reproducible or replicable your results are. So if your results are reproducible, then people can trust your paper more. So as a quick recap or a revision here, your article structure consists of a title, abstract, keywords, main text. If your paper is an original paper or like a research paper, not a review paper, your main text will go through the acronym IMRAD. And remember this acronym: introduction, methods, results, analysis, and discussion. Okay, IMRAD. Okay. Next is the conclusion, acknowledgement. The acknowledgement section is where you thank all who have helped your paper through it, people or in organizations that have funded your paper, and you have to mention the number of the grant that you have received. Proofreaders, if somebody contributed to supporting your paper, like revising its grammar or English, or for example, then you thank them, but they have not contributed to the science, so they are not a co-author. Similarly, a lab technician who has stayed late night to help you run the experiments. That technician, for example, did not contribute to the science, but he has helped you. He or she has helped you. So they should be in the acknowledgement section. Next is the references, and finally is the support materials. If you're having a writer's block, again, remember to use outline, bullets, sub-bullets, sub-sub-bullets, the more levels till you reach the level of a paragraph. Start by writing your own work and then writing everything else. Remember the red parts in the earlier slide, the core of your paper. Start with the core of your paper first. And as a suggestion, the last thing you should write is the abstract. So this is my final slide for today. So if I'm writing an article, what do you think? So now I have the results, or I've written my dissertation and everything. What do you think should be the first thing I do when I'm about to write my paper? Any suggestions on chat? Come on, everyone. We're at the end. This is the final slide. So somebody mentioned I should write the introduction first. Any other ideas? Results and analysis. problem statement. Okay, let me tell you this. I'm not writing a research proposal, so I don't need to define the problem first. I already know the problem. I've done the experiment and I've done all the work. Now it's about communicating it to other readers. So this is what we recommend. What we recommend and we believe gives you stronger papers and overcome writer's block if you don't know where to start, and helps you be very concise. Start with what you are the best expert at. Nobody knows your experiment or your study better than you do, and nobody else in the world, if you have new results, nobody else has seen your results. Okay, so don't start with writing, start with visualization. So that was a trick question. I'm sorry about that. So the first thing you should do, is put your figures and tables, describe your data. This data, these figures, nobody in the world has seen them because you're doing original article. These are your study. It's not a replication of somebody else's work. This is the first time these results are published. So start by visualizing them. Remember that a figure is worth 1,000 words. Okay. And next, when you start writing, tell us the story of these figures. What did you do to come up with this result? So write the methods first, describe it, then read the data on the results in your results section, describe your results, and tell us what they do mean. So you work from the bottom up and left to right. So figures, tell us the story, what did you do? What are the results and what do the results mean? Next, write the conclusion. Tell us what we learn out of this, and then write the introduction. So remember that an introduction is bridging the gap between what the readers know, so that changes by each journal, and what you are going to discuss. Also, the introduction establishes your problem, your research statement, the problem statement, and your motivation. They also review what other people have done and establish your differentiation. Establish what is it that you know, and what is it that your research will contribute to that are not what are not how your paper is unique or how it adds to the general body of knowledge in your paper. And the last thing you should look into is the wrapping. Like, you made a gift, now wrap it into something very attractive with the title, abstract, and keywords. That should be the last section of the last thing you do. Now, this is the wrapping. This is what makes everything else very attractive to readers. So you write them after you already know what everything in the paper would be, and you can now craft something very attractive for your readers. So with this, I reach the end of my presentation today. If you do have any questions, I'm going to look at the rest of your questions now. I would also invite you to check Elsevier free online training and courses website, Researcher Academy. There is a very interesting training on plagiarism. Another very interesting training on writing systematic reviews, especially if you're in a biomedical fields, or more specific training on writing review articles, as you can find here. These are shortened links. You can use them. And I'm going to check your questions now. So the question that we had left for a while, and my apologies, Mr. Samuel. In case 50% of the reviewers accept your paper, how is that handled? It is up to the editor. Some editors, because editors are still people who know the field that the journal is about, so sometimes they could just take the decision. Other times they could invite another reviewer to break the tie. It depends. Different techniques are managed by different authors. Do you define keywords in this section? We already answered that there is a specific section for keywords. Concerning references, how recent should the reference material be? So let me tell you that if you are working on a trending topic, that's a topic that is of interest to readers, there should be references from the current year where you're writing the paper, okay? But you can go as back as much as you want. So, but like, for example, you don't need to cite Newton's gravitational law every time you're writing a mechanics paper, for example. So just the one things that are relevant, but you can go back. We've seen papers that are published in 2022 that still refer to techniques or methods from the 80s, 70s, 60s, or even sometimes the 40s. If you believe that there's something very old that you can bring into life in your paper, a technique that people have abandoned, but you believe that this could be a game changer if applied to newer resources available, for example, you can go back as much as you want, but you should have very recent references as well to showcase that you are following up on the new things and to show us the position of your work to other similar endeavors that are currently taking place. What number of references is best to be used at most? It depends by the field. So in social sciences, for example, we see like 10, some papers would have 10 or less references. Other fields like might have 40 or 50 references. Biology people like to reference a lot, for example, and medicine as well. It really depends by the field. I don't think like I've seen a paper with 100 references, but it could be. So there is no hard limit on that. It's as much references that are relevant and needed to express your idea. If you fail to acknowledge somebody's work, that's plagiarism. Okay, so like an idea that you've used in your reference, then that would mean that you have actually plagiarized their work. So you don't want to plagiarize, definitely. What's the most thorough method to check that you are not going to duplicate a work that has been done before? So that depends on your literature discovery skills. I believe that Danishri, and correct me here, this is part of what we covered in the trainings on Scopus, for example, how to conduct a comprehensive search to make sure that you're not missing out on important papers or you're not replicating somebody else's work.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah, if you have anything to add here, I believe I'm done.
I'm going to share a resource in chat if anyone needs it, and I have emailed it as well. This will take you to the Scopus tutorials and webinars. And of course, the university will communicate with us to schedule more trainings on Scopus.
Perfect. You can follow up with us on our Elsevier Africa page. We post a lot about our trainings or different resources or similar. There is also the Facebook group Elsevier community. I'd like to invite you to be part of the discussion on Elsevier community. Sometimes there are live streams, which could be in English or other languages as well. So you can make use of that as well. And with that, I finished my presentation. I'm sorry if I've gone beyond the 1640, but I tried to take as much questions as possible. And I believe that I've answered all the questions here, unless you believe that there is something that you need. We have the Elsevier Africa YouTube channel, a lot of recordings there as well. And with that, I thank you. You can find my email here if you want to continue the discussion or ask me about anything. I'll be more than glad to. It will be most certainly a pleasure. It's been quite a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here. I sincerely hope this was useful and worthy of your time. I'm sorry if we've gone overboard, but it was communicated earlier that we should finish at 5. But luckily we were finished around 16:43, the presentation. We spent like something like 7 minutes on the lost questions that you do have and some resources links. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that, Khaled. My battery died, but just want to say thank you so much for accommodating us. This was one of the best author workshops I've attended. Very clear, And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Danishri.
Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you, Khaled. Thank you, Danishri.
Thank you, Ms. Dibila.